know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, you need a,
Well, and back in Delmar, it was
some
85.
This
Yeah,
is really it's not straight because it suppresses noise all around.
Too old to go through.
Okay, but to pick up somebody that's more than
I'm not cool with them.
you
By
might
myself.
probably go sit. Maybe, I don't want to say definitively, I know because I use mics and I
See
tell
if
you
that's
that
fair enough for you.
this is not a mic that's powered.
I know that.
Gotcha.
Those mics, the sound frames are not as sensitive.
First way.
I don't, I think people are tall enough so that we can see their faces in spite of the mic.
Right.
Most cool.
You have a,
Does that,
Should I put it under the tablecloth?
yeah, honestly, I don't know if it's gonna, I think this is,
I don't think
gonna test audio for like 2 minutes, so just let me know when things go. When my slides, maybe I pick up.
Good morning, Roman. How are you? Good.
Mike's not coming?
Yeah, she's not coming.
No, the two of them were just unbelievable.
Good morning. We are, we got our member. I thought you weren't coming. We're so glad you came. Do we have another seat for you?
Yes, we do. We're going to finish quickly.
We are going to start this meeting. This is a deliberation meeting on the issue of legislative and executive compensation. It's a continuation of a discussion we had at our last meeting. Since then, we have received a number of reports and comments, which are all listed on our website. And Roman had asked again at our last meeting to see if we could get certain professors and others who are academics in the field to respond to our inquiries. And thanks to our staff, and Mindy, thank you for following up on that. We did get some responses which have been helpful. So I open it up to the commission to start the discussion. Roman, do you want to comment on the reports we got?
I would love to.
Because
First off,
you are the person who pushed us on that.
I'm really pleased that Mindy was as diligent as anyone could be, and rounded up a couple of people who had interesting things to say. One in particular, Professor Squire, is, I was describing to Mindy before we started, as a graduate student, I had the good fortune of having one of my professors be a man by the name of Richard Fenno, who was and is the premier student in the country and the world in the study of the Congress. And he did seminal work in 3 or 4 different aspects of the study of the Congress that defined the field. And everybody since then has kind of done research in one of the venues that he outlined. In the study of state legislatures, there was another guy, roughly the same age, who recently passed away 3 or 4 years ago, a man by the name of Alan Rosenthal, who was at Rutgers, who studied state legislatures. And he too defined the field. Each new book was another avenue for subsequent researchers to do their work. And when he passed away, the New York Times identified him as, the leading scholar of state legislatures. The person who followed up with that, but with a different focus than Alan had, was Professor Squire. And so to get his comments, to me, that was like the ultimate. We had the premier expert in the country thinking about state legislatures who gave us advice about things to think about. Without regard to any particular thing he said, these are things to think about. And I was just really tickled to have that to work with. When I looked at the work that they did, the two people particularly that commented, when I looked at the material that Fran had provided us on what has happened with MC professionals in the state government.
That was actually Gary who got that,
Okay.
but we had a lot of discussion. Well, I think I made the
I thought I
request.
saw the email from you.
Actually,
but-
Mindy who got it, but.
But, okay, thank you both. The point is that it was good work, and again, good foundation. When I think about the material that we had, when I think about the issues that I know about, when I think about what Rosenthal said, who, as I said, I thought was the premier student of the state legislature, what he identified as the function of the legislature, I think are things that we should think about. He said their purpose, the way we should evaluate them. He wrote a book called Heavy Lifting about a dozen years ago that was what he said at the time. Wasn't the last thing he wrote, but he said at the time, this is the culmination of my academic career. I've thought about this for many, many years, but I never wrote it down, and here it is. Here's what I think a good legislature is. And what he said is it's representation as the first thing that he talked about, and representing was the function. He said it was lawmaking. That was the second thing that he talked about. And given the fact that Fran is sitting next to me, I say there was a little trepidation. And the other thing was fighting with the governor, fighting with the executive. The reason we have legislatures is to resist the executive. And he did a spectacular job in that book. He didn't talk about anything specific. And when one time I asked him, would he ever talk about that? He gave me the same answer that Dick Fenno had, which is, wait a second, I can't study these guys if I'm giving commentary on them. So I'm not going to ever do that. And he, as far as I know, never did. So he didn't talk about mundane matters like what should they get paid. He said, here's how we should think about them. And I took Squires in that form as well. It's not, here's his recommendation, we should listen to it per se, but here's his recommendation and here's his reasoning. Here's his thought process. Here are the things we should think about. And I thought it was just spectacular. I took that and did a little bit of noodling in a spreadsheet, basically along the lines of the MC calculations that I'd been given, and said, okay, so if we do the way things are done that we looked at for the senior managers of the place, and said, so how should we think about legislatures? How should we think about commissioners? How should we think about the senior executives, the electeds? And, well, one of the options is the MC guys got 42.25%, that at least one of the groups did. There were technical details as to why some of the other groups got slightly different, but that's a good number. We had talked previously about 42 as a number that was kind of inflation. I had suggested a number like 47, which got me to a number for the A commissioners that to me was the right kind of feel for a number, and that was 47%. If I do all of those various calculations, I get numbers like 200,000 for the A commissioner, or 194,000 for the A commissioner, 193,000 for the A commissioner, depends a little bit on how you round. If I do that same calculation for the governor, I get 254,000 and change, which I'd round to 255. If I did 47%, I get something like 263. If I look at the other electeds, in that 263 point of reference, it'd be 222. If I look at the legislature in that same point of reference, it's 116.9. Those are the kind of numbers, to me, are the right realm, and the kinds of issues that Squire represented, the kinds of things that I think about, where we're talking about how do you get good quality people, how do you keep good quality people, what do you do to recognize their accomplishments, all of those things rolled in together. That's the flavor that, to me, is the right flavor. We can argue about detail without me being concerned one way or the other, a little higher, a little lower. But I think the issues are things like, how do we get good people? How do we keep good people? How do we think about what it takes to make the organization function and keep attracting good people? We need to do those things. We need to have people say, I'd like to be commissioner. I'd like to be promoted to be commissioner. I'd like to be the head of the agency and direct the agency. I'd like to be governor and direct how the agencies function and interact with the legislature. I'd like the legislators to be well enough rewarded that they'll stick around, because I think, and I use Squire in part, I use Rosenthal in part, we need people who are smart enough, who are knowledgeable enough, who've learned enough that they shouldn't be listening to their senior staff as the only source of information. They shouldn't be listening to lobbyists as their only source of information. They should be listening to the people that elect them. They should be listening to their colleagues. They should be thinking for themselves. They should be drawing on all those influences. They should be smart enough to sort through all that stuff in really complicated things. And I think that's not a part-time thought, whether it's commissioner or a governor or a legislator. I think that's not a part-time avocational idea. I think that's an investment in a career. It's really hard work. As someone who spent 20 years as a senior legislative staff person, I'd like to think that the people I worked for were smarter than I was, and that they listened to the advice I gave them, but took it as advice, not as direction. I'd like to think that when I interacted with lobbyists, I didn't have to worry that the people I worked for didn't know enough to interact even more sophisticatedly than I did. I want that in government. And I think that if we're talking flavors like the ones I just outlined, to me that puts me in the right realm. That's going to attract good people. It's going to get people from the city of New York to come and work in the legislature. Boy, they're not going to do it for the money in those kind of numbers, but they're not going to be so put off that they can't accept the idea. They're not going to be so strapped in their thoughts about how do I support my family and take the job. I want that for the commissioners too. I don't want them to be in a place where they have to say, I can only do this for the weekend because I need to support my family and I need a real job. So with all of that as backdrop, I want to thank Mindy. It was really great. I know how hard it is to get academics to drop what they're doing and for no compensation come and tell us what they know. They've spent their full careers thinking about the issues that we're looking at, and we're only part-time thinking about it. So, really great. Thank you.
Roman, do you want to make a proposal, or?
Well,
do we want to have
I had
some
made a
discussion?
suggestion about 8 commissioners as an idea last time, which was to go to 200,000, which was a little bit more than inflation. It was a nice round number. That's how I got there. I said, well, a way to think about them would be to then look at the other commissioners proportionately. They are currently A, B, C, D, E, F, and each of them is a proportion of the top one. So use the same proportion. So if we're looking at the F commissioners, that would be a number in the neighborhood of 133.5. If I were to do the same percentage increase for governor, as, again, a point of reference, I know technically that's not what we're doing, but I'd like to think that we're mindful of what that should look like, because we are asked to look at the comptroller and AG. So if he went up the same 46, and it was 0.06 is what that translated to, the governor would get to 263.2, lieutenant governor would be 222.78, actually. So would the comptroller and the attorney general, and the legislature would be 116.9. And then if I factor in the thought that we're not really dealing with what's called the LULU, the stipend that leadership and committee chairs get, so the speaker and majority leader, their current stipend is 41.5. So if I left it that way and looked at the legislature at 116.9 and said the stipend for speaker majority leader is 41.5, I get to 158.4. By the way, what that translates to is the members, the routine member without any extra, goes up 46%, but depending on the size of the stipend, all of the people with stipends go up less. So speaker majority leader would go up 31, or 30.9 actually. Everybody else would go up proportionately differently because the stipend is different for each role. But all the way across the board, it would be an increase, but not proportionate because the stipend isn't going up. So in my mind, there's a proposal, and I would do that not so much as that's my proposal, that's it, as much as, well, here's a place to start the discussion.
Thank you. Do we have anybody who would like to comment on?
Well, I would just like to say thank you, because I think that getting that benchmark, it's a place to start. I still have a bunch of questions, and I'm still trying to get some additional information, including I have asked to get some information from Jacob in terms of outside income. I found that the material that we got, particularly Squire's material, was interesting and informative. I found the other material to be really not terribly helpful. For one thing, it didn't really tell us very much, and his focus seemed to be really seemed to be on the relationship between raising legislators' salaries to more public spending. I guess we'd have to dig deeper into his material to know whether he found the details of the correlation.
Well, let me respond to that just in brief. I think what he ended up saying was there isn't much.
Right. No.
And I think that's interesting in the bigger picture of our deliberation. We shouldn't be terribly worried. Is
I
the way
wasn't. I guess I'm dismissing it because, frankly, I never thought of it at all. So I think I had already dismissed it. So,
but I think there was actually something to be addressed there that I found helpful, and that is this. One of the concerns about raising the pay of elected officials is, does that make them kind of less careful with our dollars?
right.
And the answer is not obviously so.
No,
and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I would have guessed that was the outcome. And I think that your analysis in terms of the executive issues that we're dealing with, executive pay issues, while I lean towards looking at the MC increases as sort of the barometer, rather than cost of living. And I say that because the MC increases are generally given when from a budgetary standpoint, the government is able to do them, right? Whereas built-in cost of living increases, which are typical in contractual labor, right? I have never believed is something should be the arbiter of pay increases, because I think that as the keepers and the keepers of the public fisc, when times are bad, public employees are generally, executive employees generally have to eat it, right? So whether you're the governor or whether you're a commissioner, or whether you are an assistant commissioner, but those that fall in sort of the MC world. So I'd be more inclined, as I think of this more and more, to look at those MC increases over the period of time than the cost of living or the consumer price index or any of those other economic barometers.
And if we looked at that, Fran, where would that take us?
It's as Roman pointed out, it's 42 and change, I think, was the MC number.
Right.
It's not that big a difference,
Right.
but I think it's a huge difference in my view, in terms of going forward. Because I think one of the things that we want to come out of this with is both for the next 4 years, right, but also for commissions that come. I don't want to set a precedent that's hard to undo for those who take our place 4 years from now. I think that would be the wrong thing to do. The second comment I'll make about some of the things that Roman, first of all, I don't know why you would have any trepidation about saying that the legislature is there to fight with the governor. That's what separation of powers is all about, and I'm a big believer in it. So you should have no trepidation about that. I do think that the way when we think about salary, that it is a different process for me in thinking about legislators' salaries who are elected, who answer directly to the public that elected them, versus executive employees. I'm not talking about the Attorney General or the Controller or the Governor when I speak this. I'm speaking about the full-time managerials, high-end managerials that basically run the day-to-day operations of our government. I think I look at them differently, and as is no secret, I've never believed that what we do for one is what we have to do for the other. I think that they're different. I think that they should be treated differently. So those are sort of some of the issues I'm still thinking about. I had a question, which I actually asked Mindy about, she and I agreed on our reading of it. Someone here may have a different view, so please, by all means, which is regarding the Lulus. I'm not a lawyer. When I read the statute that created us, it leads me to believe that we actually could take some action having to do with the Lulus, meaning we could, as part of our recommendation, do away with them. I'm not suggesting we should do away with them. I'm just saying that as we think about any increase in legislative salaries, do we want to look at the Lulus as well? Not just that we raise the salary and then we add on the Lulu that exists right now. Because it seems to me, until somebody tells me we can't, that in fact that is something that we are allowed to do by virtue of the law that created us. So that's something I'm thinking about. The issue about that you raised, Roman, which I do find interesting and probably take some issue with, is whether or not rewarding legislators so that they stick around is something that is real in terms of what we see, which is most legislators aren't going anywhere. That the ones that we have now get reelected time after time after time after time. The public is wholly dissatisfied with them, if you believe the mail we get, and yet they keep reelecting their legislators over and over and over again, rather than exercising their right to vote for somebody else. But I haven't seen a shortage of people who want to be state legislators. I may be wrong about that, but I certainly haven't seen any evidence of it. Nor does it appear that those who are serving now, many of whom have been serving for a very, very long time, are leaving because of this issue. Finally, the issue of full-time versus part-time, which actually gets to my part of my issue about comparing the legislature right now to the executive. We do have a part-time legislature, and I was interested to see in Professor Squire's submission that he seems to think we have a full-time legislature here, which, because he says that, I read this the other day, I didn't read it carefully, but he does say that. And he talks about comparing us with California and Pennsylvania, which, according to their legislative websites, are clearly full-time legislatures, even though I think California is 9-month legislative session. I'm going to be interested in one of the pieces of research I'm going to try to do over the next month or so, is in fact to see whether, and if anybody knows the answer to this, you can save me the trouble, but I want to know whether or not outside income is allowed in those
Other states?
other states that have full-time legislatures. And when I say outside income, I'm not talking about investment income or, writing a book income kind of thing. I'm talking about people who are practicing law or practicing some other profession while they're serving in the legislature. It would be interesting to know. It's just another piece of information as I try to figure out how I feel about all of this. But I do think we're a lot further along. And I'm still not there on any of this, including where I think we ought to turn out on the executive, although I think personally I'm further along there. But there's still lots to think about, and this information's been very helpful.
One observation, if I might. The question of full-time, I think, is a really tricky one. And I think it's tricky because we're not sure what the job is when we talk about legislator. One of the reasons I brought up Rosenthal is in part my real great regard for the work he did and all the books that I've read that he wrote, but particularly his notion that one of the aspects of the job is lawmaking. One is representing, the other is the resisting, but the lawmaking is the only one that we identify
Right.
when we talk about the calendar.
Yep.
But that's not where they spend their time.
Well-
if you use Rosenthal as a specific, he talks about how members, and he studied them by going to talk to them and living with them and interacting with them. If you talk about what do they think they're doing, most of them think the thing that got them there, the thing that they do, is the representing. And that is full-time. That's 24 hours a day. That's, you go home and somebody calls you at 10 o'clock at night because something bad happened in the neighborhood, and they want you as legislator to be their ombudsman with government to go figure it out and fix it for them. That part doesn't count in the calendar. It by definition, and so I've always thought that they make a mistake in representing themselves to the public by saying, here's our calendar, here's our work day. It's a few hours a day, a few days a week for a few months of the year, except at 10 o'clock at night when somebody calls you, you don't say, hey, I'm not at the work, and hang up. They do that, and that part to me is the critical part.
Well, it may be. And I tried to say this the last time we were here.
I know you did.
But I was interrupted and misinterpreted. And I'm going to try to say it more clearly now. I don't really disagree with you, although I do believe that that job is at least equally, if not more, done by a more local legislature, whether it's the town council or the city council. There are problems that constituents have with the state and with state agencies, and I have no doubt they call I've done it, right? You call your representative. I'm not arguing that. I do believe that the degree to which that is part of the job should have been testified to here. I still believe that. I do not believe that legislators coming before us and making that case is in any way contrary to or in conflict with the reason we were created. We're not asking them to make a decision about their raises, right? I was never suggesting that, nor do I think having them testify to say, this is what we do and this is why we deserve a raise, because we don't just legislate, we do A, B, C, D, and E, not just A, right? Would have been helpful not only to us, but to their case. And in fact, that hasn't happened. And we can argue about that or disagree about whether they should have or not. But my own opinion is that they should have, that they should make the case as to what they do. Here's the other piece of it, though. So long as there is outside employment allowed, which applies to some number of legislators, not all, right? As opposed to having a full-time legislature with no outside work of that kind, leaves open the possibility, and that possibility has been realized in major ways in recent times, for conflicts of interest between those two masters. The master being who you work for on the outside and your responsibility to represent your constituents. And those things can come in conflict. And so long as that exists, whether they're really working full-time, and some probably are and some probably aren't, or not, I'm always going to view them as part-time, even if they're putting in a lot of that work, because that extra work over legislating, because of all those issues. And that's just my view of it. And we can respectfully disagree about that. But those are some of the issues that are ultimately going to inform where I come out on this. And I'm not there yet. I don't know where I'm going to come out yet. I really don't. I'm just not there yet.
Let's try to get some other people into the
Well,
conversation.
one last thing, because I meant to say it based on last time, and I forgot, and I apologize for that. But one of the things that strikes me as an important dynamic, both for the commissioners and for the legislators, is the sense that coming before us was potentially understood by the public as unseemly for them to come to us and make a pitch, one way or the other. And I don't want to hold that against anyone.
Okay.
And so I just want that in the mix.
I certainly in terms of the executive, I never expected employees of the government, even commissioner-level employees, to come before us and make that case. I actually think the governor has made the case publicly many times in recent years about the difficulty of attracting good people. All the things that you and I agree on, we need to be able to do to get top-level executive management into state government, and he's made that case often. I think it's different for the legislators, and it didn't seem unseemly to me, but we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that, that's all.
Barry, let's get some more comments from anybody else.
Well, my impression in terms of, the considerations is that for both legislative and executive, we are one of the starting points is the fact that, of course, there have been no increases since 1999. So we are in the 17th year of no increases. And I think that in and of itself is a very significant consideration for us in terms of, yes, I believe there's certainly a need to increase both legislative and executive salaries. Now, on the issue of the executive compensation, I am more or less in accord with Roman in terms of the ballpark to me seems to be for the A commissioners somewhere in the $195,000 to $200,000 range. I think it is a reasonable range for those persons who are clearly full-time, this is what they do, and they don't have outside income, we don't have that issue. And in terms of comparability, when we look at New York City, particularly, and the salary levels since 2015, that it would place them at least in the ballpark. It still will be below the level of the senior commissioners in New York City, but I think it places them in reasonable stead. So whether it's the 42.5 or the 46 plus, I think, the range is a reasonable range. The other consideration with executive is, of course, the salaries of their deputies that we have talked about with respect to commissioners. We know that there are deputies making 170s, 180s already. And it seems to me that the commissioners should be at a level above their deputies. So that they don't, the idea that people only want to be interim or want to be deputies but don't want to be the commissioner is somewhat absurd, but it's because of that 17-year lag and the fact that there's been no movement. Now, with respect to the legislative salaries, I looked at Squire, and Squire came in at around 114 plus, I believe 114.2, and I thought that, again, taking into account the 17-year period, that was not unreasonable per se. But the two caveats to me are, one, addressing, Fran, your concern, we certainly can make a recommendation with respect to Lulus. And because those do skew, the whole piece as far as the legislators are concerned, and the range currently under the legislative law is from 9,000 to 41.5. Quite a spread between, those members who are at the bottom and the members at the top. So I think that, some recommendation with respect to the Lulus would be appropriate. But more importantly
Barry,
to
excuse me, when you say that the appropriate, a recommendation
By
that,
us.
that Lulus be eliminated?
Well, and I
or-
think we have to discuss that further, whether we're talking about.
You could also change them.
Or adjusted, you know what I mean, and how that should be done. The second piece, I think, critical with the idea of the legislators is the fact that as a matter of law, it is a part-time body. And there are realities in terms of, there is no question that we have members, and probably the majority of the members, that is their full-time job. That's what they do, and they do it on a full-time basis. But as currently structured, because they can, in fact, have unlimited outside income, I think that's a very, very critical issue. And so it seems to me that a recommendation in the range of 114, 115, whatever it's going to be, should be sort of conditioned upon the fact that there be a limitation with respect to outside income. And my thoughts are maybe, no more than 25% of legislative income.
But we're not allowed to deal with that other than by making a
recommendation.
recommendation. And therein lies part of my dilemma, which is if we could remake the whole system, I'd be much further along, by the way.
Well, yeah, and I mean-
but we can't. So
We have inherent limitations because of the current legislation. But I'm just saying, I think that we should try to address that issue. I am not that uncomfortable with the 114, whatever, that arena, assuming that, there are certain other limitations.
But,
And-
but when we decide this issue, and we can make recommendations, there's no you gotta decide it as if
Right.
your recommendations
Was-
would not be followed.
that's exactly right. That's my problem.
And that's, I think, the reality, is we can make any kind of recommendations, and it's advisory, and, but the number may be the number. So I think it it is a difficult determination to make because we don't have a clean slate. Gary, do you want to add anything on this side of the table? I don't want to ignore the left.
I had
The
a,
left is very popular these days.
At least for the next few nights.
I just had a question, and kind of following up on that last point in terms of the arena in which we are playing and how we see ourselves limited by the governor's salary. What do we need to stay below the governor's current salary? Do we see ourselves being able to anticipate going above the governor's salary, and how does that enter into our deliberations?
I think my thought, at least, would be that if there were these other changes in salary, the governor's salary would likely change as well to reflect these changes. So for me anyhow, I would not look at that as a cap or anything else. That's up to other people to conclude what that should be after we make our recommendations, assuming those recommendations are accepted. At least that's my thought. Shouldn't stymie us. Rita?
So,
Yeah.
I would just add, I'm still struggling, right? I don't want to connect necessarily the executive with the legislature because I remain very uncomfortable. I know we can't affect the part-time issue, but it's a big problem. The public sees it as a big problem. Certainly, they've lost faith in a lot of what Albany does. And I'm sure it's because of the few and not the majority that are singled out and prosecuted. But to your point, it is a full-time job. It should be a full-time job. Members of the legislature work hard. They should be compensated for full-time and take out all the temptation or the appearance of conflicts by making themselves full-time. And so I really am stuck at why would I recommend or vote to recommend increasing their part-time salaries? Because it won't, that'll just keep them placated and happy, and there'll be no impetus to try to change the system. We can't change the system, but I firmly believe the system needs to change. So I'm still very much struggling with my role here and how that will affect decisions by the legislature.
Okay. Do you want to any other comments? The point, this point. Well, just trying to synthesize what's been expressed so far. I think that it would be fairly easy to come up with a determination on the executive salaries within a small range. I don't know what people's feelings would be on the high or low end of that range, but at least I'm hearing that there is some consensus around within the range of the executive salary. There's a lot less consensus and still lots of questions on what to do about the legislative salaries. So I guess, is there any more information? Fran, I know you said you wanted to get some additional information.
Yes, I'll make a suggestion with that. I suggest, since Fran raised it, that an inquiry be made to counsel to the governor, counsel to the Senate, counsel to the Assembly, the drafters of the legislation we're acting on, as to whether or not, inclusive within that legislation, there is anything we can do about the rules. And then rely on the opinions that you get from the drafters of the legislation.
So let's assume that we do that, and they say you can only make recommendations, and we can
Well, I
follow
think
it
we'll
or
be bound
not.
by whatever it is the drafters of the legislation said they did when they drafted the legislation, and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. I mean, the only way not to do that is to go get a judicial interpretation. I don't think anybody here is suggesting that. So the drafters know what they did, and ask them.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think we should find out. And then the other, the other,
Let me, before you continue, does anyone have any problem with making those inquiries? Okay, so we certainly will proceed down that course and do that. And Fran, I'm sorry.
the only other piece of information that I'm looking for right now is to get a better sense, if not a real sense, a complete sense of how many of our members, how many legislative members are in fact, do have outside income versus how many do not. I don't have a handle on, I don't have a handle on
Easy
it.
answer to that, Fran. Actually, there have been a lot of newspaper articles lately showing that based on the current filings,
Right.
which I guess we can get,
Yeah.
that the majority of both the Senate and the Assembly have no outside income. Now, I don't know how you define outside income any more than you do, but I assume they were talking about earned income because of the ages of members of both houses of the legislature. There are obviously legislators who have 403B, 401K,
Right.
IRA, KEHO income under RMDs, receiving Social Security, et cetera. I mean, all that is quote unquote income.
Yeah, I'm not
But
looking
that's
at that.
passive income.
That's passive income,
Yeah,
that's right.
as we would look at it. The information I saw, which I think we can get confirmed, which is basically newspaper information, was that there were 6 members of the Senate who had income in excess of $100,000. One is an executive in a family corporation, had a lot more income than that, and congratulations to him. The other 5 were attorneys, one of whom is retiring, and one of whom is the current majority leader, who quit his law firm in 2015, but had a report, obviously, for 2015, and has said he's reporting no income other than his Senate salary for 2016. So that leaves 3 members of the Senate who are attorneys out of the 63 members who are earning that kind of income. Hardly a great number. And my concern always has been for particularly the younger members of the majority in the Assembly, who Roman knows as well as I do, have to spend sometimes 8 years, I think it's still currently 8 years, before they can even get a Lulu, so therefore they're on basic salary for 8 years. Many of them are from the city of New York, which of course under standard of living comparisons has the highest amount of standard of living of any place in the state, and they're existing on a very small salary, quite frankly, after 17 years. And quite frankly, who do a lot more work than their colleagues on the other side of the aisle in Assembly, who are receiving Lulus because they have a majority position and therefore have a responsibility and the ability to pass legislation. And I think that's, in my opinion, what Professor Squires was referring to in his report when he was talking about a full-time legislature, and that was the effort that was being put in it in terms of New York. And I must say to you that going back to at least my memory, which is back obviously to when I joined the legislature in the late 70s, the complexion of this legislature, notwithstanding the Constitution, in terms of full-time versus part-time, which was obviously never an issue in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, is that there's a much greater amount of full-time, as it were, legislators than there ever was decades ago. And I think that number is obviously increasing, not decreasing. Witness the fact that all 3 current leaders of the legislature have done away with, 2 of them who are attorneys, have done away with their legal participation and are existing only on their legislative salaries and, if necessary, any other outside income that's passive. And I think that's the way it will come. And obviously, to change that, it is not within our power, and probably won't happen with the legislature. There's going to be a constitutional convention, voting of which will take place in 2017. Obviously, the structure of the legislature as identified in the Constitution will be a subject of discussion if and when that happens. But in terms of it being an increasingly quote-unquote full-time effort, yes, that's certainly happening. But, you know, you sort of have to, you got to get elected every 2 years. So whether you're quote-unquote full-time or part-time, if you ignore your constituency, that can result in, quite frankly, you're not getting elected. And there are certainly contested legislative elections each year, not necessarily a great amount of them, but each 2 year. But they certainly happen. And legislators, at least those that I've worked with over the years, wanna, quite frankly, work hard. And they do, as Roman mentioned, get 10 and 11 o'clock phone calls and have to do something about it. I won't get into a discussion of who has a greater responsibility, legislators on a local level or legislators on a state level. Quite frankly, I think both those legislative entities work hard at all times, born about the fact that, yeah, they get reelected, but they have to show something for what it is that they do.
Well, I know we're not ready to vote anything up or down, and people have thoughts, but I must say, from at least my perspective, we have the legislature the way we have it. It's a part-time legislature, and people may be working full-time, but it's still a part-time legislature, and they do have outside income, and it may be limited for most of the folks, and that's the reality. We can make all kinds of recommendations, but that's the reality that you're going to have to decide this in. And there are the Lulus, and you have to, and they're not eliminating the Lulus, regardless of what we may recommend in the future. What they'll do is another thing. So I think in the end, you're going to have to make a determination based on the realities that there are, no matter how hard it's going to be. So we'll get the information, get these letters out that you suggested, get the information that you need, Fran, to give you, more time to cogitate on these things. Is there anything else we can get for any of the commissioners that will help them come to a determination? Because sooner or later we have to do that. And maybe we don't come to a determination if we can't get a member of each of the groups
With
that
respect
appoint.
to information gathering, one of the people who did testify before us was a representative from Common Cause, and they had done a study at the end of, I believe, last year, maybe it's the year before, where they had tried to determine the extent of outside income. And it would be good for us to secure that study as well and share
be
it
good.
amongst.
Yep.
We'll definitely get that.
Good.
Mindy got it written down.
Probably easier than getting it from Jacob.
Probably. Certainly quicker.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this question. Since we want to send these letters out and we're going to be hopefully getting answers from the various council, should we set a meeting for September and give them an opportunity to respond?
Some of that might even be done with a phone call in the first instance, instead of sending letters and getting phoning the three councils involved and saying, because it's not a complex question, and I have a feeling, just based on that was all discussed when they wrote this legislation to begin with.
As for the timing, though, irrespective of whether we do it by letter or by phone call,
Right.
I think Jim's probably right. At least we can get a first reading, if not a complete reading, that way. We're heading into the dog days of summer. It's hard to get people
September's fine.
together. I think one of the things I think we've heard this morning from everybody is that no one's quite ready yet, and there's still some thinking to be done, and more information to study. I completely agree that we should not have a meeting in August, but in fact look to do a meeting sometime after Labor Day, sometime maybe mid-September, which still gives us lots of time, and before we reconvene.
Great idea.
Anybody have any problem with that? We'll make sure, we'll get some dates out to people and, unless we want to try to do it now.
Should we get the 2015 ethics submissions while we're at it?
Sure,
Which will,
sure.
hate to have Mindy, sorry, Mindy. We can do a compilation off of that. As I said, I obviously don't have them. I just know what I read in the newspaper. Some reporters compiled them.
And before you do it, Mindy, I actually put a request in to try to get this stuff from J-Cope. So before you go spin your wheels, give me a couple of days to see where that is, because it may be
That's
done.
very good. I looked on J-Cope, and up it all came. So I started to scroll down and went to a black screen. I thought,
No.
I thought somebody didn't like me.
Yeah, they may say no, right? So let me find out.
Well, I don't
But
think they can say no.
I don't think they
They're
can.
on
As far as
freedom-
it's all public information.
Yeah, it's all on freedom of
Right,
information.
they're just not making it easy. But let me see whether I can get this, and if I can, I'll get it to you. You can disseminate it to everyone. If I can't, I'll let you know that, and everybody else, I'll let you know that as well.
Well, just to throw out a date, looking at September 13th or 14th, does that work for people? It's a Tuesday on Wednesday?
Hold on a second.
13th works, the 14th doesn't work for me.
Okay, does the 13th work for everyone else?
Hold on,
Yes.
hold on.
Okay.
Come on.
Right now, it looks good to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Everybody else? Gary, that work for
That's
you?
fine.
Okay, hold on.
13th, we're talking about?
Yeah. Tuesday, the 13th.
Tuesday the 13th? Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. So we'll call a meeting for September 13th at 11 o'clock here, probably at the City Bar, and we will put it on our website, and we will try to get all the information that the commissioners wanted, so we'll be in a position to have a discussion and perhaps a vote, unless people need more time. Anything else we can do today? It was a short meeting, but I think a very helpful one, and is leading toward a decision. Okay, then we will adjourn this meeting, and we stand adjourned till September 13th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank everybody.
Thank you.